I went to Portland. I was lucky to find work and great players to play with, and had a good time until I got restless again. Maybe I lost my mind. I was approaching 40. And for my midlife crisis, I decided to apply to law school.
I've had the good fortune to serve on the board of the International Society of Bassists with today's guest. He's a super cool artist, fascinating musical journey, and we get into all kinds of great topics. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we're talking today with Alan Lewine, who wears many hats. One of them is being the legal officer for the ISB board, like I mentioned. And I love the path that he's been through in the music world, from deep Southwest ties. We talk about that, and there are so many commonalities between my path and his path and places we've lived and spent time in. It's one of the things I love about doing a podcast like this. We dig into law school. Why law school? What was that like? What did he do after that? Very interesting. And this new chapter in his life, he just moved to Arizona with his wife, Ana María, who is his collaborator in Soprano Meets Bass. Our excuse for talking was their latest very cool album, beautiful album, Sephardic Treasures. I was listening to it on my run back before I spoke with Alan. It's just a wonderful album and is getting some really good press too. But wow, just the path he is on, that he and Ana María are on, very, very cool. We've got the album linked up. Definitely check it out. This is the first episode I ever did where the fire alarm went off. I kid you not, during our chat. Yes, I left it in. I edited it a bit so it doesn't go on for too long, but the bizarreness of that moment, and Alan just rolled with it. It was pretty funny. Yeah, so you'll hear that and Alan's journey and much more. Definitely check out the album and follow along with Alan and Owl Song Productions on Facebook, Instagram, all the good places. They're all linked up too. And let's get into this conversation with Alan Lewine. How have you been?
Oh, I've been great. Life is busy and hectic. I'm trying to settle into a new place. But you move all the time.
Well, yeah, I do, but I've been 5 years here in San Francisco, and we just bought a place right before the pandemic. We got a place in. Yeah, it was like the week before shelter in place went into effect. So, but the good news is I can see the old place from the new place. It was just like one condo building over. We were renting in one building and we bought in another. So it was a relatively easy move. But that, my friend, is a big change from headed down to the Southwest. That's awesome.
Well, it's cool though, because I lived in the Southwest for about 15 years back in the days when I was a full-time musician. Before I became a full-time musician again.
Where were you in the Southwest originally, or before?
Well, in the late 70s, and this is where I started gigging, actually, I was living in Bisbee, Arizona, in the southeast corner of the state. About 30 miles from the New Mexico border, about 6 miles from the Mexico border.
Oh, wow. So my wife's from Albuquerque, and I
lived there all through the 80s.
Oh, get out of here. Really? I had no... and my mother-in-law was working in Gallup, New Mexico for a couple of years. And so I went and spent a couple days in Gallup and drove up to Window Rock, Arizona. And that's cool that you got those Southwest roots. It's such a cool part of the country. I get back to Albuquerque maybe once every year or year and a half, and I love it.
Ever since I left Albuquerque in 91, I still get annual shipments of frozen green from friends of mine there. I can't live without it.
Yeah, I miss that. I ate. It's been a little while since I've gotten some. Trader Joe's just got a shipment of Hatch, like mild chilies, but that is not the same. I roasted them up and they're fine, but it's not. It's nothing like that New Mexico, like the real deal.
So it's only about 6 hours drive from here now. I'll be there when we get into the chili season a little further,
okay.
One way or another.
Okay.
Maybe not all the way to Albuquerque. Maybe I'll go someplace closer to just get chili.
Yeah. I love it. It's funny because when I moved to San Francisco, I was thinking in my mind, I'm going to be closer to New Mexico now than Chicago. And then I did the math, and it's almost equidistant driving from Chicago to Albuquerque or driving from San Francisco to Albuquerque. It's like my perception. But if you go down to LA, it's only like 11 hours or something to Albuquerque, I think. So it just shows how much further north and west we are here in the Bay.
Yeah, I guess so. I wish I knew San Francisco better. I've been there a couple times for a week or so or less, but I don't know the city.
It's a crazy place. I like it. My wife and I decided apparently this is where we're going to live. It makes no financial sense, and it's definitely it's definitely a more, everybody's just so packed in tight here, particularly in the city. I mean, kind of the Bay Area in general, but like it feels so much denser than Chicago in a lot of ways. But also there's a lot more nature just in the city than Chicago. Chicago's got some beautiful parts, but it yeah, I don't know. It's been interesting. Like having nice weather year round, it has been a real positive, and just having access to the water. Like we're on the waterfront, and so I can get out. And I was actually listening to your album coming back last week, and just really enjoying sort of like the walking along the ocean, and just really having a nice moment.
So you're on the Pacific waterfront or the Bay?
I'm on the Bay, and which is good because it's a little more sheltered. Like it's a good 10 degrees warmer in North Beach where we're at than on the ocean side. But I get out most mornings. I didn't this morning, but most mornings I head west for a run along the North waterfront. And depending how far I get, I'm getting into the west, so I'm getting toward the Golden Gate Bridge, and so it gets like colder and foggier as I go. And then as I head home, it's usually it's a strange place weather-wise. But it's a great. I mean, there's it's an artistically interesting place to be, and in more normal times, there's good jazz. Still not as much if you talk to anybody from 10, 20, 30 years ago. Certainly not as much as there was, but you still
That's true anywhere.
Yeah, that's true. That's true anywhere. Yeah, for sure. Well, we got to get you out here one of these days. It's a great place. And my neighborhood in particular, North Beach, that's like the old beatnik part of San Francisco. Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and all those characters hung out in, and some of these places, assuming they survived the pandemic, they've still been open since the 50s.
Well, I made the pilgrimage once to the City Lights bookstore in that neighborhood.
Yes, indeed.
Lawrence Ferlinghetti's bookstore.
I'm headed right to that corner a little bit later today. I got to fill up my SodaStream bottles and do some. And that place, that is such a special place. It's like that neighborhood it's one of the parts of the city that has been the most untouched by the tech industry. So it still feels, it's like guys in funny hats, and just it's a little bit, then you get down south and everybody's young and everybody is dressed in some sort of like t-shirt with a logo on it, but North Beach has still got that funky vibe for sure.
Yeah, I've long been into the whole beat era thing. The beat poets and writers, yep, and all that stuff. I've been, I wasn't in the day, of course, but
right.
But no, I've been into that stuff since my teenage years when I started reading Kerouac and
really
stuff like that. And that puts me back in the very late 60s, early 70s.
well, you would love we've got so you've got City Lights, and then just half a block over on Broadway is the Beat Museum, which I thought was going to be like a touristy sort of kitsch place, but actually is not. It's actually a fantastic museum, and it's just got all this. Oh yeah, it is. That was when my wife and I moved here. We found ourselves at that corner of San Francisco all the time. We weren't living anywhere near there, but we found ourselves continually going to North Beach, and then we were looking for a place. We were getting kicked out of our medical resident housing, and something popped up in North Beach, and we headed over here, and we haven't, we've just decided to hang our shingle here, and so it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, but that's a great neighbor. You know, one of the highlights of my music career still was back in the early 80s. I lived in Taos, New Mexico for a year and a half before I moved to Albuquerque. And after I moved to Albuquerque, I got called back to Taos because they were putting on a Taos Poetry Festival.
Oh, wow.
And they asked me to do some improvisational bass stuff and, you know, be part of it and hang out, which was cool. It was fun. And Allen Ginsberg was appearing.
No, really? Wow.
And I got invited to just play some improv bass while he read.
Oh, man, that is so cool.
It was so cool. Of course, there's no video or recording of it. It was one and done. It was ephemeral, as music should be.
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, I could picture it, or I'm picturing it in my mind. I love Taos and going up to Taos Pueblo and just that whole that northern New Mexico is just such a special place. My father-in-law lives in Albuquerque still and is really into just the various pueblos and Native American culture and the Spanish roots, you know, of the longtime Hispanic population there. It's so interesting. He lives in Rio Rancho, which is pretty close to Bernalillo. Oh, yeah. And so I've just had such a great time exploring with him because he has just the nature of the place, the cultural history of the place. It's a fascinating part of the country.
You know, when I moved to, I've got a wandering history in my youth. But after I left Bisbee, Arizona, which I mentioned, I headed north. I thought I was on my way to British Columbia, but I only made it as far as Colorado, and I kind of ended up staying there a couple years. I lived in a little one-room log cabin at 9,000 feet for almost 2 years.
Really?
But, oh, yeah. And it was great. I was not gigging hardly at all, but I was shedding. And kind of learning to play and learning to understand jazz and concentrating on that stuff. But 2 winters up there was enough. And I decided to head south. And I ended up in Taos County.
Wow.
And at the time, having lived in the middle of nowhere for a couple of years in the forest, Taos was too big a city and kind of blew my mind. So I got a place about 15 miles out of Taos, on the Valdez Valley rim, sort of on the way up to the ski valley, if you've been there.
Sure.
Just before you get into the canyon that goes up to the ski valley. And overlooking the Valdez Valley. It was a great experience. I love northern New Mexico more than any place I ever lived.
Oh, great. Oh, you know what? We're getting the fire alarm just went off. So
Deal with it.
one moment.
I'll stand by.
I'm back. Well, that's the first time that's ever happened in an interview. I've seen her like, wah, the whole building. It's the disadvantages of condo living. But we're so anyway. My apologies.
Not a problem.
That's the beauty of not doing this live. Is I can edit that out. So sorry about that. But
you can edit that out.
Oh, I can and will edit that out. But I'll save that video for our own personal entertainment. It's fine.
So do you know what happened?
Well, this has happened. Yeah, well, you know, I live in this 3-building complex, and what generally, that's not the first time the fire alarm's gone off. What generally happens is someone microwaves their popcorn and burns it, and they freak out. So they open their door, which then sets off the fire alarms in the hallway. So now we're on the first floor, so I just walk right out, and so that's only happened maybe once or twice before, but I know this routine. It's never been a fire. It's always just popcorn. So I figured I'd be back in 5 minutes.
Are you in an old building?
No, I'm in a building from the 90s. So I mean, Luckily, we selected this place for many reasons. But one is that it's quite soundproof. It's modern construction, and so we don't get bothered by anybody, and nobody seems to be bothered by us. So
that's a plus.
That is a plus. That is a plus.
You won't find that in the old buildings.
No. You got the character in the old buildings, but I'd rather live near the old buildings, but actually go home to the new building. So.
I hear you. I was a homeowner since the mid '80s. Bought my first house in Albuquerque. I was through 5 houses, but over that time in different cities, each one. But I'm now a renter. Mm-hmm. And in an apartment. I've never lived in an apartment building before. I've rented shacks.
Yeah.
And falling down places.
Right.
But, I'm a renter in a nice apartment now, and I don't have to worry if something breaks or the roof leaks. Not my problem. I love that.
Yeah. Those are the advantages. I'm realizing the disadvantages, which are just what you're describing of owning, or like looking at this wall and it's like, I don't like that. I guess I'm in charge of that now. Owning. So, but it's all good. But what were we were talking about your Colorado, living in a shack. 9,000, or not a shack, but a cabin.
A little log cabin.
Okay, 9,000 feet, and then Taos County, and then did Albuquerque come after that, or?
Well, it was. Let's see. I was approaching 30 years old, and I decided to, and I was frustrated. Didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. Music has never been a way to make a good living.
Right.
Except for, if you're lucky here and there. So I was scraping by, but I wanted to do something different. I decided to go back to school and finish my bachelor's degree. I was a New Mexico resident by then. I went to Albuquerque, went to UNM. I had a couple years of college after high school, but they wanted me to pick a major and I wasn't ready. So I told them I'd take a year off for 8 years.
Nice.
Anyway, so that's what moved me to Albuquerque. I decided to go back to school and to get in a little more urban setting.
Okay.
Albuquerque's not urban like San Francisco or New York, but compared to 15 miles outside of Taos, New Mexico, it is.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I've just always enjoyed that city. And certainly, if you're going to vacation in New Mexico, probably you'd be going to Taos, you'd be going to Santa Fe. But I've always liked Albuquerque, and I thought it was really interesting. And the bosque, the forest, that down on the Rio Grande, just exploring that area. My mother-in-law has and currently does live against the Sandia Mountains, kind of up that direction. So I have a lot of good memories of exploring that whole area.
Where did I got to ask, I don't know if I ever met your wife, but where did she go to high school?
Oh, she went to, I think, is it El Dorado High School?
El Dorado?
Yeah.
Aldo?
Yeah, there we go.
up in the Northeast, I think. I remember. Because what I did to pay for college and to make my living in Albuquerque, besides gigging, which I did a lot, I was working 5, 6, 7 nights a week most of the time I lived there. I was also a substitute school teacher during the day.
Oh.
And I subbed around at lots of different schools, including El Dorado.
Wow. I wonder what the odds are that when was this time frame wise?
80s.
Okay, she would have been too young, probably.
Okay. Well, not only in high schools, but yes.
Okay. Wow. That's so.
What are the odds?
I know. Well, small world. That's what I realized doing this show too. It's fun to like. I didn't even.
If she remembers a one-legged substitute teacher anytime.
I will ask her tonight for sure. So how long were you in Albuquerque then?
From 82 to 91.
Oh, wow. Okay.
About 9 years.
Okay. And
it was a good time. And like a lot of moderate-sized cities that you wouldn't think of as music cities, there are a handful of great musicians there. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I was playing with great players. My strategy for learning to be a bassist was to be the guy that made the effort to go out and find the gigs and hire players that were way better than me.
It's a good move. It's a good move.
With way more experience. Of course, they weren't bass players because I didn't need 2 bass players on most gigs.
Right. What was your major when you went back to school? Was it what was it?
Well, actually, I got a biology major with a focus in molecular biology.
Really?
I was interested in that. You couldn't major in molecular biology. It barely existed at that time. But I got a minor in music composition.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating.
And, because one of my frustrations at the time is I had musical ideas. I couldn't get them on paper. And that helped me be able to start to get things on paper.
What were you thinking in terms of the molecular? I can't even say that word. That's how uneducated I am. Biology interest. Were you thinking of going on to do something in the medical field or work in a lab or something, or you just were interested in it in general?
Yeah, at one point I was thinking of going to medical school.
Okay.
When I started that program.
Wow.
And then I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I got my biology degree. I put myself through college there by gigging. Mm-hmm. And I decided to just keep gigging. That's what I wanted to do.
What drew you away from Albuquerque then? Was that when you went down to Arizona, or what how did that all work out?
Well, I got to be a big fish in what began to seem like a small pond.
Sure.
I wanted to find a bigger pond, and I went up to Portland, Oregon.
Oh.
And worked Portland, Seattle, occasionally Vancouver, occasionally some other cities south in Oregon or in between Portland and Seattle. Portland was a great music city in the early 90s. It probably still is. I don't know. I haven't been back. But at the time, there were, Leroy Vinegar was a bass player that lived there and was working a lot. And I was fortunate to be mentored by him some and hang out with him. There, Dick Burke, who was a San Francisco drummer, was living there also, and great player.
Oh, wow.
Some of these guys were rent refugees from California.
Sure.
Mel Brown, who used to play with Diana Ross, lived there. Another great drummer. And so I went to Portland. I was lucky to find work and great players to play with, and had a good time until I got restless again. Maybe I lost my mind. I was approaching 40. And for my midlife crisis, I decided to apply to law school.
So that I was wondering where that played in. Okay.
I mean, there's a story around that too, and everything's got a story.
Well, yeah, I would love to. I don't know that I've done 750 of these or something. I don't think I've talked to anyone who went to law school that I can remember. I might be wrong, but I think you're the first.
It's not the normal musical path. Although there are a number of fine musicians who are lawyers, but yeah. It's, Anyway, I had lined up a gig on a cruise ship with Princess Cruises and one of their marquee ships of the era. And for the first few months, we were going to do the Northwest Passage up Alaska from British Columbia. And I hired a piano player singer from France who I'd worked with when she lived in Portland, but by then lived in New York City. And a drummer friend of mine from Seattle. The gig called for a trio. And, we were going to do the cruise ship thing, play 6 or 8 gigs a week and live in tiny windowless cabins and have lots of time to ourselves, which we could, of course, either spending all the money we earned at the gambling tables, or my idea was to go with my computer and spend my time trying to write music. Unfortunately, when we got to the dock in Vancouver, I never met the captain, but he apparently saw us waiting there and says, "Who's that one-legged guy with the big case?" I had my bass in a case, a wooden homemade travel case for the purpose. It looked like a coffin. And apparently he decided, I can't have a one-legged crew member on this ship. Send him home.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Wow.
This is 93, I think. And maybe 94. No, 93 probably. Anyway, so we left. We went back to our places. I had organized this thing. I felt responsible to the other two musicians who had given up all their gigs, who had given up their apartments or sublet them or something in order to do this. And I got in touch with somebody, I got a pro bono lawyer and started going through the contract. And it turned out not to be a simple matter. The ship was flagged in Liberia, I think, or Panama, I think Liberia, I don't know, somewhere like, where these ships are flagged. It was owned by a British company. It was captained by Italian captain. This happened in British Columbia, Canada, and maybe maritime law applied, maybe not. The ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, had just been passed, and nobody really knew how it worked and whether it even applied here. And then my contract, which I hadn't read carefully, provided for arbitration of all disputes in London, England, in person.
Great.
So anyway, a bunch of negotiation and back and forth with the help of this pro bono lawyer. We reached a settlement where the cruise line got off very easily, but sometimes a fast nickel beats a slow dime. And I wanted to take care of the other two musicians. So we got to the settlement. And then one time, around the time we were finishing it up, my pro bono lawyer says to me, "You organized your materials really well and really helpful here. Did you ever think of going to law school?" And I said, "What the hell? I don't think so." But I started thinking about it. There was a law school admissions test exam coming up in 3 weeks, and it was the last day to apply for it. So I did. And I applied for the LSAT. I went down and to the public library, got a 3-year-old copy of an LSAT review book to see what the hell it was all about. This is the first time I actually ever used my college degree except for to work as a substitute teacher, since I'd graduated almost 10 years before. Anyway, I took the LSAT. I had the great advantage over everybody else in that room, I think, who was there like their life depended on it. It's like, let's see what happens. Let's see how I do. So I did okay. I applied to some law schools. I read the rules and I found out I could waive the application fee since I didn't have a whole lot of income, so I could afford to apply to the law schools. And I got into some, and one of them was Georgetown, which is a high prestige law school. And so I said, okay. And I went.
To Georgetown. Wow.
Yeah, Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And that's how I ended up back on the East Coast.
So,
where, I grew up in West Virginia.
Oh, you grew up in West Virginia. Okay.
Yeah, in Wheeling, West Virginia. So I was exposed to more bluegrass than jazz as a kid.
Oh, interesting.
But I always liked jazz. I don't know why. My parents educated me well. They used to, when I was a kid, take me to hear the local symphony orchestra to their concerts. But the turning point was when I was about 15. I went to a local amphitheater in a park and snuck in to see the Count Basie Orchestra.
That's awesome.
Which kicked my ass. This had been about 1970, I guess. So it was still Freddie Green and a lot of the cats from the great era of that orchestra.
Wow.
Anyway, I'm jumping around and
that's
digressing
okay.
within my digressions.
I love it. But I'm just like, talk about a path. Growing up in West Virginia and then making a break for British Columbia at some point and not quite make it, and ending up in a cabin up in the way up high, and then time in the Southwest, and then of all places, Portland, Oregon. Albuquerque gets like 300 some days of sunshine a year. To go from that to whatever Portland is, which is not.
A little better than San Francisco.
A little better than San Francisco, but and then back to the East Coast, DC. That's quite a path.
Yeah, well, it's the one I took. There wasn't a master plan here.
What was law school? What were you expecting, or what did it go the way you thought it would? What was that experience like? Because I just imagine like the gigging life of a musician, I can understand, and just what that entails, and the sort of and then from that to law school in your 40s, that must have been an interesting transition.
I was 39, not quite 40 when I started.
Okay.
But I mean, basically, besides the circumstances, I decided that my dreams of making it big in the music business were not likely to come to fruition because I was almost 40, and you got to be young, I thought, to have things happening. Like I said, I was frustrated. I thought, I'm almost 40. Nobody pops onto the music scene at this age. Wynton was 22 when he popped big a few years ago, et cetera, et cetera. Coltrane was like 20 or 19 when he left Philadelphia and moved to New York and started to pop. Not that I'm Wynton Marsalis or John Coltrane. But I thought, I'm getting older, and I'm a little tired of playing bar gigs where people aren't really there primarily to listen to the music, or maybe a few people are, but the espresso machine's louder than the bass.
Right.
So I was frustrated. I said, okay, time for something different, and did the law school. One good choice I made is I got into their night school at Georgetown, because they have a very good night school there, and so, as I expected, a lot of students were closer to my age. The day school students who had done nothing but go to high school and then college, and most of them straight to law school in their early 20s, would have been like going back to high school or something.
Sure. Right.
It would have been too weird. So I went to night school, but I was such a fish out of water. I remember I'd never had a corporate job in my life. I didn't know anybody that had ever worked a corporate job in my life. And there's nothing more corporate than being a lawyer, unless you're kind of like the guy that hangs his shingle on the corner and, gets the kind of practice that they write these legal thrillers about.
Right. Better Call Saul and such.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, but it worked out pretty well, because when I was first there, I started going to some jam sessions in DC. And just as law school was starting, I was at this one session where I used to play sometimes, used to sit in. A very cool session led by a pianist named Lawrence Wheatley, who called himself the Bard of Bop. He never made it big. He kept himself in DC, and he liked hosting jam sessions. But he was this mysterious Thelonious Monk-like character. He always wore shades, no matter how dark the bar was. Usually wore a beret, had a little goatee, and didn't talk most of the time. And when he did, he said something that tried to sound profound.
Sure.
But he was a good player. And some of the very best players in the DC area used to come into this session that I used to go to on Sunday afternoons. So one day during an intermission, I was talking to another fellow who had sat in, and he and I were like the only white guys in the place. interestingly. But we got to chatting a little bit, and I say, you play nice, man. Who are you? You look like a guy with a day gig. Mm-hmm. He was tall and straight-laced looking, short hair and all that. And I said, what? So he said, yeah, I got a day gig. I said, so what do you do? And he goes, this is so funny. He goes, well, and he kind of looked around to make sure nobody was too close. Well, I'm a lawyer. It was a nice thing, though. He was a lawyer at the time with National Geographic Television. And part of my plan was to find day gigs to give me a little experience, an idea what lawyers do and what the atmosphere is like. He got me a gig as a law clerk at National Geographic Television. That was the beginning of my legal career.
Oh, wow.
So a law clerk is kind of like an intern, you're not a lawyer, but you can do some grunt work to help them get stuff done, and they paid, not big money, but got great experience. And it led me into the internet and technology law that ended up being my career in the law. Because one thing this is 94, the World Wide Web graphical version had just barely come out.
Yeah, that was like the days of Mosaic. I remember that was right when I was starting college, and they gave me like a 3.5-inch disc, and they said, I think they gave me Turbo Gopher was the first year. This like not even a graphic browser. It was like and I remember my roommate being like, look, there's all this information on this thing that we can access, and I didn't even have a computer at that point. Okay, wow, what an interesting time to get into that.
Yeah, I had first gotten online when I lived in Portland, and I'd been on the internet some. It was just basically Usenet. You know what Usenet is?
I do, but maybe for those listening who are not familiar, what?
Well, it was just basically Usenet. It was news groups is another word for it, and chat rooms, that sort of thing. There was no graphics. It was a command line interface that you type to, and I messed around with that. I would telnet through Tektronix, which is based in Portland, and had a public telnet for anybody that knew how to do that. Mm-hmm. That's how you would connect it with a 56K, if even that, modem. Anyway, I'd been online a little bit, so they asked me to. So the head of the department said, "So what's up with this internet thing? I've heard a little bit about it. Is it something we should care about?" So I looked into it a little bit more and gave a little advice on that. Mostly I was doing television production deals, helping organize them. But that led later to me getting a job, because to my real interest in this. There was a forum at the law school where different people came in to speak, a panel discussion sort of. And one of the panelists was Ellen Kirshner, who at the time was the general counsel of a fledgling online organization called America Online, based in the DC suburbs. Not being overly shy, I went up to her after the forum and introduced myself and say, "Oh, I've been on AOL for 3 or 4 years. And I'm really interested in this, and I'd love to come and learn more about that, work there, whatever, and instead of brushing me off, she invited me to come talk to her, and I got another law clerk job there.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
So, to shortcut my whole legal career path and not bore you with it, by way of a number of stops, including a few years at PBS and then at a law firm, eventually I moved to Philadelphia when I got a job with Comcast. And at first, when they expressed interest in me, I said, I'm not your guy. I've never had pay TV in my life. Comcast is one of the nation's big cable companies. I said, I've never had pay TV in my life. I hardly watch television. What do you need somebody like me at Comcast? And they said, well, think of us more as a technology company. We do a lot of work providing it as an internet service provider and through our website. And I think that's where you could add some real value here. And I thought about it, and also, I've been living in D.C. I thought Philadelphia was someplace the train passes through on the way to New York. Why would anybody get off there? But I didn't know. But I was clueless, Anyway, I took the job with Comcast. You might say that I went from working for the largest and most hated internet company in the world in the 90s to the largest and most hated internet service provider in the world in the 2000s.
I'm talking to you through Comcast right at this moment, so it's
okay. And I've got a Cox connection here.
Okay. Oh, that's funny.
but there you go. Well, and whether you hate Comcast or not, it's not my fault.
Well, it's interesting because, I'd love to know your experience going and getting a job where outside of music, but still being active as you so obviously have been over the years in music. Do you find that not playing as many, not taking gigs because you have to, I'm guessing, but maybe taking on projects you want to, did that sort of change your creative output? Because I'll just share, for me personally, I was gigging all the time back in Chicago, and I had barely any time to myself to do any creative projects. These days I've scaled it way back, and it gives me a lot more time to explore. I feel like I'm able to scratch that creative itch more. Did you have that experience?
It's tremendously freeing. Mm-hmm. It really is. Although, I did 25 years between law school and practice, and I have to say I kept my fingers in. I still gigged occasionally. I still recorded once or twice. But now 4 years of retirement and trying to be a full-time musician again, my chops still aren't quite up to what they were when I started law school. So, because I wasn't playing every day, and the best way for me to practice was always to play, to gig.
Yeah.
I've got lousy discipline for doing regular, serious, focused practice. I'm still working on getting better at that.
I think we all are, me included.
But it was tremendously freeing. I had the good fortune to continue to live relatively modestly for the type of positions I had, the income I had. And I retired early, age of 61. And I'm doing what I want to do musically. I'm going to, right now I'm not taking any gigs because there aren't any.
Right.
There's a pandemic going on. But when it eases up, I expect to get to know folks in the Phoenix area here, to get to go out and do some gigging as a way to keep my fingers in better shape. Mm-hmm. But mostly since I left the day job, I'm only doing musical projects that are meaningful to me creatively. Mm-hmm. I don't have to play every bar gig, wedding and bar mitzvah that comes along. I'm free to get out of genres, which I've always been interested in a lot of kinds of music. And I like exploring new combinations, and I did that more than ever before with this recent release.
Yeah, what was the idea behind this? It's a great album, and I'll just get it out there because you're there. It's a Grammy submission too, right? Is it Parma? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's Parma Records. We signed up with Parma Records, which is a large indie label that's been around for 10 or 12 years, mostly focusing on the music of new music by composers in the classical vein. But they branch out into a little bit of various stuff. They expressed interest. We got this going. We're on a label that's part of Parma called Ansonica, but Parma's the parent label. And their internal committee, I just heard about this a few days ago, their internal committee decided that they wanted to submit this album for a Grammy Award. Now, it's a Grammy entry, it's a Grammy submission at this moment. Maybe someday it'll become a Grammy nominee if the Grammy voting membership of the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences, I think it is.
Right.
If enough of them vote for it, first, I guess it goes to a selection committee that decides categories for it. I'm assuming it'll go into world music.
That's a likely destination, I would say.
Yeah. It's funny, though. I don't like that label very much. Most of the stuff that gets labeled world music that I hear is like watered down, insipid kind of new age stuff with some South American or African influences. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's what this is. I don't think that's what this is.
Yeah.
But maybe I should just get over my problem with that phrase. With that word.
Yeah, this is genre. Yeah, having to have something that can fit into a category in Spotify or in Apple Music or whatever is sort of a bummer. Even in the classical world, there are all these people that are in, I guess, what you would call the classical crossover category, which I think is kind of a dumb category. But that it's, I guess, people like to put things in boxes, which this. And other things you've done, but especially this album it's super interesting, musically interesting. And it came out in late 2019 or early 2020? It came out recently.
The official release date was July 24th of 2020.
Okay.
So it was a 3-year process since we began the recording to get through all of the straightening out my idea of the concept and what to include, mixing, mastering, and then going through the pre-release process. So initial recording sessions were in 2017. Ana María Ruimonte, my wife and singer, and I initially started working on this project in 2014 or 15 and working up some of the material and performing some of it, going back that far.
Wow.
So it was a long process. And, after 40 years in the music business and 5 years working on this concept, maybe I'll be an overnight sensation.
Well, it's remarkable to me how long, and I guess it shouldn't be remarkable if I think about things in my own life, but how long the creative process can take to actually get out there. Okay, I thought it just came out recently, but I think I saw an earlier year pop up. It must have been referring to like when it was recorded or something. But
well, there's that. You've attended ISB conventions where Ana María and I have presented some versions of this as we were developing the project as well. So you've been aware of it for a little while. ISB convention goers would be aware of it for a little while. Yeah. But it finally came to fruition, and the album cover is cool. I like it.
It's very cool. And speaking of ISB related things, I got this will relate, but I got in 2016. I took my high school orchestra. I was a high school orchestra director. I took my high school orchestra to Cuba, and I came back and opened up Bass World. And what did I find but an article from you about going to Cuba? Which you then have done many times, right? Can you just how did Cuba come into your life?
Well, I've got to take you back a few years again.
Okay.
Because I was aware of the music scene there and that it's very interesting. Mm-hmm. And as far back as 1978, I first decided I want to go to Cuba, hang out, meet some musicians, see what's happening there, interested in their government, interested in the ideals of the revolution. I'm a little disillusioned now as I understand more how the ideals don't always come to fruition as maybe originally considered politically. But at that time in 1978, I was living in Bisbee, Arizona then. I said, okay, and I plotted it out. I can take a bus to Monterey or somewhere on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. I forget exactly where I had in mind. And from there, a relatively inexpensive flight into Havana. And I understood that they wouldn't stamp your passport if you were an American because they knew it would cause you problems going back home. Mm-hmm. And hang out in Havana a while, and then I could fly back and take the bus back to the States. I never quite pulled that together at the time. But that's really when my fascination started to get serious. And I thought about it a few more times and thought of ways to do it, but didn't bring it to fruition. And then I met and married my wife, Ana María, back in 2013. We got married, and she is a very serious classical singer from Spain, and with a lot of professional credentials and histories, and disciplined and deeply trained musician. She's the opposite of me. I'm an undisciplined, self-taught musician who snagged green room lessons when I had opportunities from some amazing players. But anyway, we were talking, and she had been checking out YouTube and checking out the classical music scene in Cuba, and said, there's this piano player there that plays the music of Ernesto Lecuona, and he's amazing, and he's still alive, even though he was in his mid-80s by then. He said, we should go there and meet him. I said, well, I'm getting ready to quit my day job, and my birthday's coming up. Let's do it. And so initially we went there to meet Uberau Herrera, marvelous piano player. He just turned 91, but has an amazing 70-year career as a pianist. He worked with Ernesto Lecuona. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Lecuona.
I am, yeah.
Yeah, so you might call him the George Gershwin of Cuba.
Yeah,
or maybe more accurate to call George Gershwin the Ernesto Lecuona of New York.
There we go. I like that.
In that he bridged classical and popular music, and he brought popular music sounds into classical music, and he wrote a lot of popular songs, though his conception was to have them performed by classically trained musicians as well. They didn't stay in that narrow thing. But so the first trip down there was to meet him. We worked out an opportunity to perform as part of the Cuba Disco fiesta at that time of year. So that was very cool. And we met Uberau. We began recording with him at a studio in Havana. I met several of the bass players in the National Symphony. They were very nice. They had instruments beat to hell with 15-year-old strings on them. So I had an idea about that. Thanks to a lot of help from the ISB, I gathered up a lot of year-old secondhand strings from players that were donated, and I carried a whole suitcase of strings down there with me and gave them to bass players around Cuba. And it was a gas. There's not a lot of English spoken down there, except for in the highly tourist areas, which we tried to avoid too much of. But Ana María, of course, is completely fluent in Spanish. I was learning. I'm getting better by now. And so we got by. We had the day we got there was my 61st birthday.
Wow.
And looking around on the internet, I found a Paladar, a private restaurant called Café 61. And I said, let's see if we can get a reservation and go there.
Oh, cool.
So I had my 61st birthday dinner at Café 61, which was named because it's on 61st Street. But nonetheless, and several musicians that I had made some advanced contacts with came and met us for dinner. We bought them all dinner and some drinks and had a very nice time. And it was a good start. We've been back to Cuba several times, performed there several times. Did some video, did some recording there. I was last in Cuba in January, in mid-January. Finally got an invitation to Jazz Plaza, their big annual jazz festival in Havana, to play my originals.
Cool.
And I went down there and did in a week, I think 5 or 6 concerts. I formed a local band of young Cuban musicians. Who I got introductions to mostly through the engineer at the studio where we'd been recording. These guys were good. They knew how to play. They were young. They didn't have the seasoning of a 60-year-old musician. But they could read. They understood the feels. And I didn't go down there to play Afro-Cuban music. I said, okay, I'm going to bring my music, my American music with me, my American jazz style stuff. And boy, we had a blast. So these young musicians and me, and while we were down there, we went in and recorded some stuff as well, which I haven't decided if I want to try to release. But that was the last visit to Cuba, and it was an awful lot of fun. We came back, stopped a week in Miami, and did a concert of the Sephardic Treasures program at Florida International University, which went nice as well. Before we came home and got sick and woke up and decided, okay, it's time to start getting ready to move.
Well, that's it. I'm sure you'll be back to Cuba at some point when travel becomes easier. And what a cool. I remember just kind of following with what you've been doing in Cuba and thinking, man, that's what I wanted to be doing in Cuba. So I can't wait to go back and have a little bit more of a, not with 60 high school kids in tow, and be able to explore. And it's really cool. Well, I hope if you end up releasing that material, I can't wait to check it out. Alan, hopefully this is the first of many chats. I've had people on. I think Danny Zeman holds the record. I think he's been on the podcast 7 times. And you keep on putting out all these cool projects. So the next one to come out, let's hop on and chat again. Or if we're back to like doing things in person again, maybe we can chat at a convention, or when I'm down in Arizona next, or something like that.
Or when I get to...
Or when you come to North Beach.
San Francisco.
Exactly. So maybe we could there's so much we could talk, we could chat for hours, but I should probably split. I got another chat in a few minutes. But I will, we should have done this a long time ago. Apologies for waiting until 750 episodes before sitting down, but I'll send people to the new website, which looks beautiful, by the way. Really.
Thank you.
Really just beautifully sort of that must have been a ton of work, but it looks really great. And I'll send people to Instagram, Facebook, the album, obviously. Anywhere else you want me to direct people?
Other than Ansonica, which has a nice catalog page for us, which in the footer of my emails has a link to that. I think I have a shortened bit.ly link to it. But most of the catalog pages replicate their catalog page, which we mostly wrote, is replicated on the alsong.com Sephardic Treasures site as well.
Alan, I love the new album. It's very cool. Best wishes to you and Ana María out in Arizona. And folks, check it out. It's a very cool album. You can stream it for sure. You can buy it. That's all linked up to. And owlsong.com, the website, which is beautiful, by the way. It was newly redesigned. I believe we talked about that briefly in here, but just a great example of what an artist's website can look like in 2020. Speaking of 2020, and I won't do any edits. I'm trying not to do any edits in these outros, no matter what happens. I will edit when needed, as that fire alarm moment in the interview shows you. But I kind of like to think that if you make it to the end here with me, maybe you kind of perversely enjoy hearing me try to stumble and fumble my way through, especially when it's the last of 4 episodes, because I sit down and do 4 at a time, which means this is the 8th read I've done today, which is always when I'm getting a little loopy. And I look now, here it is, beginning of September. I'm seeing that this is coming out on, what is it? September 17th, I believe. So that is going to be a couple weeks away from my Discover Double Bass course launch. And I have shared this story a bit on the podcast, and I haven't really told it publicly because I work with some of the people involved still on projects, and it's a very small world and I don't want to embarrass anybody, but I really want to film a video about my first course, which was not with Discover Double Bass and which will probably never be seen because the FBI raided the company that I was working with and seized all their assets, including my lowly double bass course and courses from the Beach Boys, or the remaining Beach Boys, and 100 plus other artists. So I was one tiny little piece of that. Boy, is it a good story. But I just, there are a few things, there are some other things that would make for such delicious blog material or cringy YouTube video material. But like I said, it's a small world, and in the music education world and we call the Music Education Association event, the MEA circuit, which I participate in fairly regularly, that's even smaller. And a lot of the people that I was involved with on that project are in that circuit. And I don't know. I don't want to, bask in the humor of that. I've got another moment that I want to get out there that I think would be less, I think people would just find this one funny more than embarrassing, is when I totally dorked up the final concert of the Brattage competition in 2017. And Simone Marciniak, who I've had on the podcast before, he was one of the finalists. And you probably haven't seen, maybe you've seen this if you were watching that live 3 years ago, but we had all this equipment set up. And at the last second, the camera stopped working that we had set up, or just auto shut off. And the view defaulted to my like grainy MacBook Pro built-in camera. So people were tuning in. It was a lot of people on that stream. I don't remember what it was. I don't remember if it was 1,000, but it was into the hundreds. And all of a sudden I saw all the angry emojis start to come by as they were sitting down to watch Simone. Instead, they got my dumb, ugly mug. And this is all being recorded on Facebook. So there's this delicious moment of panic of me trying to troubleshoot this with Jack Unziker in the back of the theater. I'm covered with sweat. I'm just this like, so it's just like this beautiful shot of Simone walking out defaults to my dumb, sweaty, shadowy mug. And then this panicky conversation, and then the way I try to handle it. I think there'd be a good way to tell that story. There's probably a good way to tell that FBI raid story without embarrassing anybody, but I haven't found it yet. So anyway, the silver lining, and couldn't we all use some silver linings at this moment right now? The silver lining to my course being seized by the FBI is that I got a do-over. And I was speaking with Jeff Chalmers of Discover Double Bass in Lucca, Italy, 2018. We're talking, and he mentioned to me, he said, "Oh boy, it'd be great for you to film a course for Discover Double Bass at some point." And I thought I would be all in, because I would so rather have my name associated with Discover Double Bass than not. And I thought this company was doing good things. Apparently they were also doing shady things, but maybe, anyway. I'm going on too long, but I just really believe in Jeff and what he's doing, and I think it's really exciting, and I feel like he's kind of my internet soulmate in so many different ways, and the projects we work on, we even get mistaken for each other. People think I founded Discovered a Little Bass. People think he's the host of this podcast. So, but I was so bummed because I had literally just like 3 months before that filmed this other course in Salt Lake City with this company. Well, then in December 2018, it all melts down and the FBI raids the place, and Jeff and I start talking in early 2019. I tell him that hilarious tale. We thought briefly about shooting a video about it in Leeds when I was filming in February, but that didn't happen. And so right before the pandemic, I found myself in Leeds, and the cool thing was I knew this was coming, and I spent hundreds of hours, like several full work weeks, going through that first course that I'd filmed, which I was happy with in many ways. And I think if it resurfaces somewhere in the world with some sort of foreign language subtitles, or who knows how that would happen, I still believe in that. But oh boy, are the Discover Double Bass courses better, because now I'd had the experience of filming an online course, which is a hard thing to get experience in unless you do it. And I had weirdly done it, and it never came out. So I revamped the whole thing. I have notes, reams and reams of notes in Evernote, in Dropbox, version 5, version 6 of these outlines, and putting things together and chatting with people. I went through every single Discover Double Bass course that had been put out and took notes on everything and thought about structure and everything that you could think about, really. I went through every other online related course that I could find, not just bass. And I'm really proud about the product. And here's the thing and I will end with this. I got a lot out of filming that course that got seized by the FBI. That project was worth it, even if I never made a penny off of it or it never came out. And I remember thinking that at the time, and I'm glad, because I did get paid for the filming of it, but of course it never came out. Jeff is not going to be raided by the FBI. He's in Leeds, or the equivalent. I'm sure he's not, but even if something insane like that happened, I got so much out of the experience of doing this. And then the second course, which will come out in 2021, I got so much out of doing that. I became a better person, a better teacher. I educated myself. And so that project served me, even if not one person bought a copy. So I think that's a good way to look at projects. I definitely think that that's true with this podcast. Even if I never release this episode, or I never release this now extremely long unedited rant at the end of this episode, there's still value. I'm getting better at expressing myself. I'm getting better at trying to talk extemporaneously without relying on editing. That's kind of my new thing I'm doing at the end here. So apologies, but thank you for listening to. And I just think it's good to try to scratch your own itch or make yourself a better person with whatever project you're doing in life. So, okay. That will close out this episode. And I want to thank the team, Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, Mitch Mooring, and Krista Copper. Mitch makes a mean bass. He makes beautiful basses. I love his basses. I love his energy. I can't wait to visit Kilgore, Texas. I never heard of Kilgore, Texas before I spoke with Mitch for the first time 3-4 years ago, whenever that was. I want to visit there. I want to visit the shop. I can't wait to see how he continues to evolve as a bass maker. It's just, he's an inspiring person, and he won an award for his bass at the last ISB convention. And he's good people. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. And that's it. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we'll see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.